Dr. Ibrahim Dakubu is a teacher, healer, thought leader, and futurist commissioned by God to heal minds, build nations, and ignite faith on a global scale. His life passion is to deliver people from the pain of ignorance.
Welcome, people. Welcome to the Big Ups to Dream Jesus Leadership podcast. As we have been teaching the last couple of weeks, we've been on the topic kingdom governance. We've been discussing some concepts regarding kingdom governance. Today, we're going to talk about offices, roles, and jurisdictions. Last time we were talking about concepts that had to do with jurisdiction, not altars. We're talking about gates and all of that. And so today we're going to talk about offices, because after gates have been assigned, and gates are territories assigned, gates are controlled, boundaries supervised, and all of that, there'll have to be even more structure. And by that I mean specific roles, and jurisdictions. And these are the structures that protect power. Power has to be protected. Unprotected power, unguarded power can be abused, can be misused, and all of that. And power without structure creates chaos. In the same vein, structure without power creates bureaucracy. And we don't want our churches and our organizations to be reduced to mere bureaucratic organizations where there's no power. Kingdom governance basically requires both. It requires structure, and it requires power. One of the most damaging lies in spiritual leadership, especially in the charismatic circles, is the idea that structure quenches the spirit. Structure teaches the opposite. Structure is necessary, and the Bible speaks about it. In fact, structure preserves what the Spirit initiates, because what the Spirit initiates is like a prototype. It's sporadic. It's spontaneous and it's sporadic, but then it will have to be governed. Structure will have to be put around it. Protocols and procedures will have to be applied to make what was spiritually spontaneous now structured and continuous, right? Because it's only by structure that you can replicate concepts, ideas, and all of that, And so disorder does not necessarily prove freedom, even though many people want to simplify it like that. No, it cannot be simplified like that. Structure also does not imply control. In the kingdom, structure is protective architecture, especially if the right officers are in place. Structure keeps authority from collapsing under its own weight, because yes, authority can collapse under its own weight. And so when we say offices, we're talking about governance tools, not necessarily titles. In the Bible, offices were never designated for status or hierarchy as we have it in contemporary world. Offices were actually designed for distribution of authority. Oh, Jesus. This is why this kingdom governance teaching is so important. It's so relevant. It's so timely. Because we are in the season where we're talking about the kingdom. You know, we say, take the kingdom. Let's take the kingdom. We possess the kingdom. What will you do with the kingdom that you're possessing if you don't understand how to run it? You don't understand the archetypes of governance, you see? And in Ephesians 4, verse number 11, the Bible says, and he gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers. Notice that offices are given, not claimed. You know, it didn't say, and they claim to themselves apostles, prophets, teachers, and all of that. These are functional assignments, not identity badges, as we have seen it in recent times in our contemporary world. An office answers one question and one question only. What aspect of dominion has this person been authorized to steward? That's the question that an office basically is supposed to answer. You see, what aspect of dominion has this person been authorized to steward? Yeah, very simple. When offices become titles, governance essentially disappears, you know. But when offices remain functional, dominion expands. And it expands not just erratically or disproportionately, but it expands safely, you know. And so what's the difference between an office and a role? You know, why does confusion create conflict? You know, the Bible distinguishes between office and role, even when modern language almost blurs the two, you know, because an office defines jurisdictional authority. That's what an office does. That's what an office represents. But a role defines operational responsibility. You understand? An office mainly has to do with jurisdiction, but a role has to do with functionality, operational responsibility. What do I mean? A person may hold an office and serve in multiple roles. You understand? You know, serve in roles without holding an office. That's another scenario. So basically, I'm describing two scenarios. One being that a person may hold an office and serve in multiple roles. The other scenario is that a person may serve in roles without necessarily holding an office. These are all possibilities, right? And problems arise when roles are mistaken for offices. This is when problems arise. You know, when offices are exercised without clarity of role. Yeah, people exercise offices, but there's no distinct clarification of the role the person is actually playing. You know, problems also arise when authority is assumed because function is visible. In this case, there's no clearly defined jurisdiction. Because, function without authorization produces frustration. If you're playing a role and you don't have authorization, it's eventually you can get frustrated. Yeah. Now, one of the missing terminologies, or let me say vocabulary, in leadership is jurisdiction. Because people shy away from that, right? But it's very essential. Because jurisdiction answers the most avoided leadership question. This is why there's contention all the time, because there's no clearly delineated jurisdiction, either because people are, shy or, false humility. Basically, that's our term it. Because whether we want to believe it or not, there is jurisdiction, and everybody knows it, But we kind of shy away from some of these things, in the pretense of humility, pretending to be humble. Jurisdiction answers the most avoided leadership question, as I said. And that question is, where does my authority begin and where does it end? And that's the question that jurisdiction answers. In the Bible, jurisdiction is always clear, as we have seen it in the Bible, the Holy Scriptures. What do I mean? Moses governed Israel, not Egypt. You see, it was very clear. The jurisdiction was clear. In those days, priests governed worship, not warfare. Understand? Warfare was for warriors. Kings governed policy. Kings did not govern sacrifice. That's why when Saul tried to govern sacrifice, he was kicked out. Prophets confronted kings. They did not replace them. So when jurisdictional lines are crossed, they are breached. The Bible doesn't call it zeal. The Bible calls it rebellion or presumption. When Saul did that thing, breached jurisdiction and offered a sacrifice instead of waiting for Samuel. Samuel called it rebellion. And actually said, rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. You see? So, an authorized function is still disobedience. Yeah. An authorized function is still disobedience. One of the most sobering examples of jurisdictional violence or jurisdictional violation, if I may say, is this same example that I just gave concerning King Saul. He really tried to blur the lines, and it wasn't easy at all for him. Saul was anointed, of course. Israel cried for a king. Samuel, was ordered by the Lord to anoint them a king, to seek and anoint. And Samuel did exactly all of that because he was a servant of the Lord, So Saul was chosen, he didn't just appear. He didn't just appear to impose himself. No, he was anointed. He was chosen. He was empowered. Samuel poured oil on his head, But when he offered a sacrifice that was reserved for priests, Samuel declared, "You have done foolishly." This is 1 Samuel 13. He said, "You have done foolishly." Your kingdom shall not continue. Saul thought it was a little joke. Saul did not lose authority because of immorality. You understand? Yeah. He didn't do wickedly like David did. He lost it because of jurisdictional violation. So jurisdictional violation can be very, very, very expensive. This exposes a dangerous error in modern times or contemporary times. Good intentions do not legitimize unauthorized actions. No. The fact that your intentions were good, that doesn't make it legitimate. That doesn't make your unauthorized action legitimate. No, it will not happen that way. It doesn't work like that. One of the most solid systems of governance looking at the Bible is the system of Moses. Of course, we know Moses wrote the law. It's called the Law of Moses, the first 5 books of the Torah. Exodus chapter 18 reveals one of the clearest governance blueprints in Scripture. Moses was overwhelmed. Yes, he was. And he wasn't overwhelmed because he lacked authority. No. He was overwhelmed because authority was centralized. So he got some advice from Jethro, who was a priest of Midian, who understood leadership and structure and all of that. So Jethro counseled Moses, and Jethro's counsel introduced tiered leadership. Jethro's counsel introduced defined responsibility. Jethro's counsel introduced clear decision barriers. This was not necessarily delegation of power. No, it wasn't. It was structural delineation. Okay, let me say it was distribution of jurisdiction. You see, because centralized authority can exhaust leaders. Oh yes. And when distributed authority comes in, it sustains dominion. Understand? So that's why decentralization is important, but it has to be done appropriately with all the safeguards put in place. The reason why teams break down spiritually is it's very interesting. Most spiritual team conflicts are not necessarily personal. They are usually jurisdictional, and the team fractures when authority is unclear. That's why, in my leadership, I try to make things clear, because if you don't make things clear from the beginning, you're going to run into serious conflicts and clashes, When authority is unclear, there will be issues. When roles overlap without permission, there will be issues, So communication is very, very important. Sometimes, you may have roles, but, things are still not certain. So you communicate as you realign and adjust, because at the end of the day, you still want to be very functional. You don't want to give roles where people are not ready or committed. You see what I'm saying? So you can't allow roles to overlap without permission. There has to be some kind of regulation. Team structure when offices compete instead of complementing each other, and also there's confusion when decision rights are undefined. All of these things that I mentioned produces silent power struggles. Yeah, you don't want that in your organization when there's silent power struggles. When there's passive resistance. It may not be in your face glaringly, but it is passive, but it's there. You can feel that strange energy in the place. This also produces some kind of mirage where there's a similitude of public unity, but serious division in private. You don't want that in your organization. You want cohesion, love, and unity. The Bible solves this not with personal management, but with clear governance. Because personally, the people may be strong, they may be well trained and all of that, but these little issues of misalignment can cause problems. Let's talk about the church for a little while as we are proceeding. Apostolic order in the early church was very structured, and that's why the early church was very successful. The early church thrived not because everyone did everything. No, it thrived because each office stayed in its lane. That's why Paul wrote a lot of these epistles telling them how to conduct themselves, what to do and all that. And unfortunately, some leaders and theologians have made some of these doctrines that were not necessarily supposed to be doctrines, because most of them were context-based. You only understand it properly when you look at the culture in the time or the social structure in that era. But some of them have just been swallowed hook, line, and sinker as some kind of doctrines and dogmas that are causing problems in this modern church. For example, saying women should not be leaders and all manner of things. If you look at the scriptures carefully, you'll understand that some of the things that Paul said were context-based, culturally relevant in those days, but not good for dogmas and doctrines. But anyway, that's a separate discussion. Each office stayed in its lane. Apostles governed doctrine and expansion. Elders governed local oversight. Deacons governed distribution and logistics. Prophets discerned direction and correction. You see, everything was, organized. In fact, in Acts chapter 6, the Bible is talking about a governance manual. There's a governance structure over there. It's like a governance chapter. It's not a compassion story. No. Everything in the Bible is not about compassion and feelings and emotions. No. You'll see a phrase in that chapter that says, "It is not desirable that we should leave the word of God and serve tables." No. That was for logistics. Deacons were to do that. Apostles were to teach and structure, give structure. Now, by saying that they were not being arrogant, if it was this modern in this contemporary times, when I look at them, they think they're special now. Look at what they're saying. No, it wasn't arrogance. It was jurisdictional clarity. you know, um, founder-centered movements can result in structural fragility. That's why sometimes you hear people say one-man church. Yeah. Even if it's founder-centered, there has to be clear leadership structures. Many modern movements collapse because the authority is personalized instead of institutionalized. It may have started with one person, but as it proceeds, as it moves forward, structure has to come in. When the vision is centralized instead of distributed, there's the risk of collapse. Collapse can also happen when decision making is unclear or emotional, instead of structural. So when everything flows through one person, succession sometimes becomes impossible, and accountability even becomes threatening, and structure may feel like betrayal, so the thing is, I've said this before, charisma is good, it's excellent, it's good for starting things, for starting movements, but it is only structure that can sustain a movement, no matter how fiery it started, and the implications for leaders is that, leaders really need to confront some non-negotiables, one being that not everyone who can do something is authorized to govern it. The other is that undefined jurisdiction invites conflict. Oh yes. We also need to understand that structure is not control. Structure is protection. Oh yes. And finally, we need to understand that clear roles preserve unity without necessarily suppressing diversity. It's very, very important. So mature leadership does not resist structure. In fact, it demands structure. Structure undergirds maturity. So as I'm wrapping up, I want us to understand that offices establish authority. Yes. But roles execute authority. And jurisdiction protects authority. But when any of these things are unclear, authority leaks. Yeah, there'll be issues. Power competes, conflicts, and unity fractures. Eventually the whole thing crumbles. This is the structural law of the kingdom. God protects power by embedding it in order. So order is essential. Any authority that is exercised outside its jurisdiction will eventually destabilize the system it was meant to serve. I'm going to say that again as I'm wrapping up. The point here, the governing decree here, is that any authority exercised outside its jurisdiction will eventually destabilize the system it was meant to serve. So I like to end here, and next week we will look at supervision, because whether we believe it or not, supervision is quickly becoming the forgotten law of sustainability. There needs to be stability, and the hidden stabilizer of dominion is supervision. Catch you next week as we go further on this journey of kingdom governance. God bless you. Shalom.